Grenada Statutory Rules and Orders number 17 of 2020. In exercise of the powers conferred under Section 4 of the Emergency Powers Act, Chapter 88, for the purposes of Section 17 of the Constitution, the Cabinet of Grenada makes the following regulations. Citation and duration. These regulations may be cited as the Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 3 Regulations 2020. These regulations shall come into force on the 6th day of April 2020. Restriction on freedom of movement. A curfew is being imposed beginning from 12 noon on the 6th day of April 2020 and ending at 7 a.m. on the 20th day of April 2020. And during this period, every person shall remain confined to their place of residence, inclusive of their yard space, to avoid contact outside of their household, except as provided in these regulations or as may be authorized in writing by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Every person shall take reasonable steps to ensure that, whenever he is outside of his place of residence, he wears a mask or suitable covering over his nose and mouth. These regulations shall not apply in the case of a medical emergency. Work remotely from home. All businesses and offices may continue their business operations by allowing their employees to work remotely from home utilizing virtual means, unless they are permitted to work under Regulation 5 or are designated as being essential workers under Regulation 7. Where a business is unable to continue its business operations by its employees working remotely from home, the business shall cease its operations. Public service, statutory bodies, state-owned enterprises, and courts. Subject to Sub-Regulation 2, all members of the public service shall work remotely from home, except as otherwise directed by the Secretary to the Cabinet. Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 3 2020 regulations, where the Secretary to the Cabinet directs that specified public officers attend work, the government shall take reasonable steps to ensure safe transport of the public officers, whereby the motor vehicle carries not more than one person in each row of seats in a staggered formation, and comply with the physical distancing protocols in accordance with Regulation 6. Subject to Sub-Regulation 4, all employees of statutory bodies and state-owned enterprises shall work remotely from home, except as otherwise directed by the Board and approved in writing by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Where the Board, with the approval of the Commissioner of Police, directs that specified employees attend work, the statutory bodies or state-owned enterprises, as the case may be, shall take reasonable steps to ensure safe transport of the employees, whereby the motor vehicle carries not more than one person in each row of seats in a staggered formation, and comply with the physical distancing protocols in accordance with Regulation 6. Subject to the practice directions of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, the courts shall remain accessible, shall adhere to physical distancing protocols, and the persons employed within the public service shall work remotely from home as far as reasonably practicable. In this regulation, the court means the magistrates' courts and the West Indies Associated States Supreme Court. Closure of businesses and exceptions. Every establishment or business shall remain closed except for the following. A. Shops which sell groceries, grocery stores and supermarkets, which shall be open for business between 8 a.m. and 12 noon on days designated as grocery days by the Commissioner of Police, acting on the direction of the Cabinet and published by any public medium including radio or television broadcast. Suppliers who supply shops which sell groceries, grocery stores and supermarkets as authorized in writing by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Doctors' offices, hospitals, medical facilities and pharmacies. Hotels excluding any spas, gyms, discotheques and restaurants therein, However, such restaurants may offer takeaway or room service, and where a hotel remains open, the hotel's staff shall remain on the premises for the duration of the period under Regulation 2(1). Hotel employers shall bear the costs of the board and lodging of such staff members. Commercial ports and related businesses as authorized by the Ports Authority. Airports subject to Regulation 10(1)(a). Commercial courier flights as authorized by the Airports Authority. Businesses licensed to provide security guard services. Such other businesses or undertakings as may be specifically exempted in writing by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet, and the owner or operator of the establishment under paragraphs A to I shall adhere to physical distancing protocols under Regulation 6. Notwithstanding Subregulation 1A, the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet may extend the business hours for shops which sell groceries, grocery stores, and supermarkets. The Commissioner of Police, acting on the direction of the Cabinet, may specify the business hours for such other businesses or undertakings under Subregulation 1I. If the manager, owner, other person in charge, or employee of any shop which sells groceries, grocery store, or supermarket aids, abets, or facilitates the contravention of these regulations, the shop, grocery store, or supermarket shall be immediately closed without prejudice to any other penalty in law. There shall be no consumption of alcohol in or in the vicinity of any shop, grocery store, or supermarket, or in any public place. Physical distancing protocols. Every establishment shall ensure that all customers and staff maintain physical distancing of no less than 6 feet in or outside their business. Determine the number of persons that may be permitted in the establishment at any one time by permitting one person for every 30 square feet of store space. Place distance markers 6 feet apart, indicating where each customer must stand on a line at a checkout point. Place distance markers 6 feet apart on the outside of the establishment, indicating where customers must stand while waiting to enter the establishment. Employees of a hospital or healthcare, medical, residential care establishment or facility, and members of the Royal Grenada Police Force shall take reasonable steps to comply with the requirements under Subregulation 1, unless it is reasonably impracticable. Essential workers. For the avoidance of doubt, but subject to Regulation 12, every person shall remain confined to their place of residence, inclusive of their yard space, to avoid contact outside of their household, except essential workers who report to work, workers required to work under Regulation 4 or 5, members of Parliament, the Attorney General, the Director of Public Prosecution, magistrates and judges, the Registrar and the Deputy Registrar of the Supreme Court, members of the official COVID-19 Task Force on official duties, in the case of emergency travel to any hospital or medical facility. For the purposes of paragraphs A to E of Subregulation 1, such a person shall at all times, distance himself at least 6 feet from any other person. For the purposes of this regulation, an essential worker means an officer, staff, employee, or director of the Royal Grenada Police Force, the National Disaster Management Agency, or any person authorized by the National Disaster Management Agency, Her Majesty's Prison, the Customs and Excise Division, the Accountant General's Division, the Ministry of Social Services, the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Agriculture, waste disposal and sanitation companies, any hospital or healthcare, medical, residential care establishment or facility, essential workers of the Airports Authority and Ports Authority, essential workers of the water sector or the electricity sector, essential workers of the telecommunications sector or any other sector encompassing the provision of electronic communications, essential workers of any print or electronic media house, private caregivers for the elderly or disabled, as authorized in writing by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet, and bona fide farmers with urgent need to care for animals, as authorized in writing by the Commissioner of Police, acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Any other department or ministry or officer or category of officers or workers, as in the case of public officers, directed by the Secretary to the Cabinet. In any other case, approved in writing by the Commissioner of Police, acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Every ministry or department listed at paragraphs D to I of Sub-Regulation 3 shall operate with essential staff, which shall include the Permanent Secretary, the Senior Administrative Officer, and any other head of department, and such other public officer directed to attend by the Secretary to the Cabinet. All essential workers shall at all times carry personal identification that evidences their employment by attachment to or connection to the entity by virtue of which they are deemed essential workers. Education and religious instruction. All religious and educational places of instruction or worship shall remain physically closed. Sub-Regulation 1 does not prohibit any activity referred to therein by electronic or virtual means. Restriction on social activities and funerals. No person shall host or attend any social activity of any description, including a wedding or a funeral. Restriction on international travel, with immediate effect, except with the prior written permission of the Airports Authority. All airports, including private airports and fixed base operations or FBOs, shall be closed to incoming international flights carrying any passenger. All seaports shall be closed to regional and international seafaring and private boating, and no person shall be permitted to enter and disembark for any reason, including transiting through the state of Grenada, except with the permission of the Airports Authority and the Ministry of Health. Sub-Regulation 1 shall not apply to outgoing flights or outgoing ships, as the case may be, cargo flights or cargo ships, as the case may be, commercial courier flights, emergency medical flights, emergency flights approved, flights carrying any diplomat if permission has been granted by the Airports Authority and the Ministry of Health. Notwithstanding Sub-Regulation 2, no crew member will be allowed or granted shore leave unless for the purposes of operational difficulties and upon receiving permission from the Airports Authority or the Ports Authority. Restriction on domestic travel. No person shall offer for hire or seek to travel on any mailboat sailing into island except for transport of freight or inter-island private commercial sea transport, except with the approval of the Ports Authority and the Ministry of Health. Movement on grocery days. One person from a household may leave his residence once between 1 hour before the beginning of business and 1.5 hour after the ending of business on a grocery day to attend shops which sell groceries, grocery stores or supermarkets in the parish of his residence in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 224, and any other establishment or business exempted under Regulation 5. Employees or workers of shops which sell groceries, grocery stores and supermarkets may leave their homes for the purposes of attending work on a grocery day, and their employers shall ensure safe transport for each employee or worker where necessary, whereby the motor vehicle carries not more than one person in each row of seats in a staggered formation. Restriction on road traffic. No person shall drive a motor vehicle or any public or private road on any public or private road for a purpose other than stated in Regulations 5, 7, and 12. The Royal Grenada Police Force shall have powers to stop any motor vehicle and inquire as to the purposes for which that motor vehicle is being utilized, and to arrest anyone found in violation of this restriction. The power to tow away under Section 30 and to affix an immobilizing device under Section 30A of the Road Traffic Act, Chapter 289A, shall apply in respect of any motor vehicle driven or used in contravention of this regulation. In this regulation, motor vehicle has the meaning assigned under the Road Traffic Act, Chapter 289A. Restriction on transportation. No person shall offer for hire or seek to travel on any motor omnibus, any hiring car or taxi, a person may travel in a motor vehicle on a grocery day between 1 hour before the beginning of business and 1.5 hours after the ending of business in accordance with Regulation 12, if the motor vehicle carries not more than one person in each row of seats. In this regulation, motor omnibus, hiring car, and taxi have the meanings assigned under the Road Traffic Act, Chapter 289A. Restriction on visitation. For the avoidance of doubt, no person shall visit or be permitted to visit any place of quarantine or isolation station, a patient in a hospital or residential care establishment or facility, including an elderly nursing home, a detainee in a prison. Mandatory reporting and isolation. A person who has traveled into the state of Grenada on or after the 9th day of March 2020 shall immediately place himself in self-isolation and notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 224. A person under self-isolation, under Sub-Regulation 1, or under observation or surveillance for the purposes of the Quarantine Act, Chapter 271, or the Public Health Act, Chapter 263, shall install on all of his mobile devices as far as possible, and for the duration of his surveillance, comply with the instructions of the surveillance mobile application as pre-approved by the Ministry of Health. Any person who is aware that he has been in contact with any person who has traveled into Grenada on or after the 9th day of March 2020 shall immediately notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 224, and await instructions. Any person who is exhibiting any flu-like symptoms shall immediately notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 224. Any person who has observed that any other person is exhibiting flu-like symptoms shall notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 224. Any person who knowingly makes a false report for the purposes of Sub-Regulation 4 shall be guilty of an offence. Any person who is asked by any official of the Ministry of Health to submit himself to any testing for COVID-19 shall submit to such testing. Any person who is directed by the Ministry of Health to submit himself to self-isolation or quarantine shall comply with the direction. For the purposes of this regulation, the Ministry of Health shall be contacted using the COVID-19 helplines at telephone number 458-4787 or 538-4787. Penalty. A person who contravenes or fails to comply with these regulations or any direction for the purposes of these regulations shall be guilty of an offence and, on summary conviction, liable to a fine not exceeding $1,000 and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months and to forfeiture of any goods or money in respect of which the offence has been committed. Without prejudice to Sub-Regulation 1, a person who commits an offence by contravening Regulation 13.1 or Regulation 14.1 or Regulation 15 or Regulation 16.8 is liable on service of a fixed penalty notice by any police officer if the person so chooses to a fixed penalty of, in the first case, $500, in the second case, $750, in any subsequent case, $1,000. Fixed penalty notice. Where a police officer has reason to believe that a person has committed an offence specified under Regulation 17.2, the police officer may direct the person to state his or her true name and place of residence and serve upon the person a fixed penalty. A person who refuses to comply with Sub-Regulation 1 commits an offence. Where a police officer has served a fixed penalty notice upon a person, the police officer shall charge the person with the commission of an offence and notify the person that, if he or she does not wish to be prosecuted for the alleged offence in court, he or she may pay to the magistrate's court in the district in which the offence was committed the fixed penalty prescribed for the offence in the fixed penalty notice within the time specified. A person upon whom a fixed penalty notice is served may decline to be dealt with under Regulations 18 to 23, and where he or she fails to pay the fixed penalty within the time specified in the fixed penalty notice, or within such further time as may be allowed in a particular case, his or her conduct constitutes a declination to be dealt with under Regulations 18 to 23. A police officer shall serve a fixed penalty notice personally upon a person alleged to have committed an offence specified under Regulation 17.2 and shall send a duplicate of the fixed penalty notice to the Magistrates' Court of the district in which the offence is alleged to have been committed. Where the fixed penalty is not paid within the time specified in accordance with Regulation 22, the duplicate sent to the Magistrates' Court under Sub-Regulation 5 shall constitute a complaint laid before the magistrate to institute proceedings in accordance with the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 72B. A fixed penalty notice shall be signed by the police officer and shall be in the manner specified under the schedule, specifying the following: the date, time and place of service of the fixed penalty notice, the provision of these regulations creating the offence alleged, and such particulars of the offence as are required under these regulations, the amount of the fixed penalty, the time within which the fixed penalty may be paid in accordance with Regulation 22, and the clerk of the Magistrates' Court to whom and the address at or to which the fixed penalty may be paid or remitted. Payment of fixed penalty. Payment of the fixed penalty shall be made to the clerk of the Magistrates' Court as stated in the fixed penalty notice and shall be dealt with in the same manner as payment of a fine imposed for an offence under the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 72B. Payment of the fixed penalty shall be accompanied by the fixed penalty notice, which shall be completed by the person in the manner prescribed. Compliance with the fixed penalty notice precludes prosecution. A person upon whom a fixed penalty notice is served may pay the fixed penalty in accordance with the fixed penalty notice. The time within which a fixed penalty is payable is 31 days from the date of the fixed penalty notice. Where the fixed penalty is paid in accordance with the fixed penalty notice, no person shall then be liable to be convicted for the offence for which the fixed penalty notice was served, and the complaint laid before the magistrate shall be null and void. Certificate of payment or non-payment of fixed penalty in any proceedings for an offence specified under Regulation 17.2, a certificate that payment of the fixed penalty was or was not made to the clerk of the Magistrates' Court by the date specified in the certificate shall, if the certificate purports to be signed by such, be sufficient evidence of the facts stated unless the contrary is proved. Consequence of failure to pay. Where a fixed penalty is not paid within the time specified in accordance with Regulation 22, proceedings in respect of the offence specified in the fixed penalty notice shall thereafter proceed in the manner prescribed by the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 72B. Duty and powers of police force. It shall be the duty of every police officer to enforce, using reasonable force if necessary, compliance with these regulations and with any order, instruction, or condition lawfully made, given, or imposed by any officer or other person under the authority of these regulations. And for such purpose, any police officer may enter any premises without a warrant. Any police officer may arrest without a warrant any person who he has reasonable cause to believe has committed an offence against these regulations. Guidelines. The Commissioner of Police may, on the direction of the Cabinet of Grenada, issue guidelines to provide for further clarification of these regulations. Thank you.